The security footage from the First National Bank on Fifth Avenue, time-stamped October 14th, 10:14 a.m., is widely considered the most expensive piece of video evidence in New York history. It doesn't show a bank robbery. It shows something far more personal and far more cruel. It shows Julian Thorne, a man worth $300 million, delivering a physical blow to his wife, who was 8 months pregnant. He thought no one could touch him. He thought his wife's father was just a broke retired gardener living in a trailer, but Julian made a fatal miscalculation. He didn't know that the gardener was actually the man who taught Wall Street how to kill giants. And by the time the revenge started, it wasn't just Julian's money that was gone. It was his very existence. This is the story of how a single kick cost a billionaire everything. The marble floors of the First National Bank in Manhattan usually echoed with the sounds of expensive loafers and hushed conversations about portfolio diversification. But on this rainy Tuesday morning, the silence was shattered by a desperate plea. "Please, just check it again. There has to be a mistake." Samuel Thorne stood at the counter, her hands trembling as they rested on her swollen belly. At 32 weeks pregnant, she looked exhausted. Her coat was worn, a relic from 3 years ago, before she had married Julian Thorne. Her blonde hair, usually kept neat, was frizzy from the humidity. Sarah, the bank teller, looked at the screen with genuine pity. "Mrs. Thorne, I'm truly sorry. The notification on the screen is specific. Access denied. Spousal authorization revoked. The joint account has been frozen by the primary holder." "But I need to buy the crib today," Samuel whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "The delivery is scheduled. I don't have cash." "I can't override Mr. Thorne's security protocols, ma'am," Sarah said softly. The heavy oak doors of the bank swung open. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It was the kind of drop in pressure that precedes a hurricane. Julian Thorne walked in. He was the picture of modern American royalty. A bespoke navy suit, a Patek Philippe watch that cost more than the teller's house, and an air of arrogance that sucked the oxygen out of the room. He wasn't alone. Clinging to his arm was Sophia Ritz, his executive assistant, wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that Samuel recognized. It was the one Julian had claimed was lost during their honeymoon. "Julian!" Samuel gasped, turning around. She felt a sharp kick from the baby, a sympathetic response to her rising heart rate. "Julian, the card isn't working. I'm trying to pay for the nursery setup." Julian stopped. He looked at his wife, not with love, or even annoyance, but with the cold detachment one might have for a stain on a rug. He pulled his arm free from Sophia and stepped closer to Samuel. The lobby fell deadly silent. Customers, lawyers, brokers, tourists, stopped what they were doing to watch. "The card isn't working because I turned it off, Samuel," Julian said, his voice smooth and loud enough for the back of the room to hear. "I'm tired of seeing my money wasted on junk." "Junk?" Samuel's voice cracked. "It's for your son. It's a crib, a changing table. Julian, I have nothing. You cut off the grocery allowance last week. I'm hungry. The baby is hungry." Sophia giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Oh, Julian, she's playing the victim card again. It's so pedestrian." Julian smirked at his mistress, then turned his cold blue eyes back to his pregnant wife. "You have a roof over your head, don't you? You have the clothes on your back. If you want money, maybe you should ask that loser father of yours. Oh, wait, that's right. He's living off canned beans in a trailer park in Ohio." "Don't bring my father into this," Samuel said, a sudden spark of defiance igniting in her chest. "He's a good man. Better than you'll ever be." That was the trigger. Julian Thorne did not like to be challenged, especially not by the woman he considered his property. His face darkened. He took a menacing step forward, invading her personal space. "You are nothing without me," Julian hissed. "You were a waitress when I found you. You'll be a beggar when I'm done with you." "Then divorce me," Samuel screamed, the stress finally breaking her. "Just let me go. And give you half." Julian laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "Never." Samuel tried to push past him to leave the bank, humiliated and sobbing. As she passed, her shoulder bumped his arm. It was accidental, the clumsy movement of a woman carrying extra weight. But Julian reacted as if he'd been attacked. "Watch it, you cow!" Julian shouted. And then he did the unthinkable. In the middle of the First National Bank, under the high-definition gaze of 6 security cameras and 20 witnesses, Julian Thorne pulled his leg back and kicked his wife. He aimed low, his expensive Italian leather shoe connecting solidly with her shin, causing her leg to buckle. But the force of the shove that followed sent her crashing backward. Samuel screamed as she fell. Her hip slammed into the velvet rope stanchion, and she hit the marble floor hard, instinctively curling around her belly to protect the unborn child. "Oh my God!" Sarah, the teller, screamed, vaulting over the counter. The lobby erupted. A security guard rushed forward, but Julian held up a hand. "She tripped," Julian announced loudly, fixing his cufflinks. "She's clumsy, hysterical. Look at her." Samuel lay on the floor, gasping for air. A sharp, searing pain shot through her abdomen. She looked down. A dark stain was spreading across her light grey maternity trousers. "The baby," she whimpered. "Julian. The baby." Julian looked down at her. For a second, a flicker of fear crossed his face, but he suffocated it with pride. He looked at the security guard. "Call an ambulance for her, and get my lawyer on the phone. I'm suing this bank for slip and fall liability due to wet floors." He stepped over his wife's prone body, grabbed Sophia's hand, and walked out of the bank. As the ambulance sirens began to wail in the distance, Samuel lost consciousness. The last thing she heard was the horrified gasps of strangers and the terrifying thought that she was entirely alone in this war. She was wrong. She wasn't alone, and the war had just begun. The private room at Mount Sinai Hospital was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of the fetal heart monitor. It was a sound that Robert Vance clung to like a lifeline. Robert sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair in the corner. To the nursing staff, he looked exactly like Julian described him. A nobody. He wore a faded flannel shirt, jeans that had been washed too many times, and work boots that carried the dust of the earth. His hands were calloused, the nails short and clean. He was 65, with thinning grey hair and a face etched with deep lines. He looked like a man who had spent his life labouring for minimum wage. Samuel lay in the bed, pale and hooked up to an IV drip. The doctors had managed to stop the bleeding. The baby, a boy, was stressed but stable. They needed to keep her on bed rest for the remaining weeks. Her eyes fluttered open. "Dad?" Robert was at her side instantly, his rough hand holding hers gently. "I'm here, Elle. I'm here." Did Julian come?" she asked, her voice raspy. Robert's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. "No. His lawyer came. Dropped off a document." He nodded toward the bedside table. A thick envelope sat there with the logo of Sterling, Cooper, and Thorne. It was a non-disclosure agreement, accompanied by a check for $10,000. Hush money, disguised as a spousal support advance. Samuel began to cry. "I can't do this anymore, Dad. He's too powerful. He knows everyone, the judges, the police, the media. He said he'd take the baby. He said he'd prove I'm mentally unstable because I'm poor." "He said that?" Robert asked. His voice was very low. It didn't sound like the voice of a gardener. It sounded like gravel grinding against steel. "He said you're nothing," Samuel sobbed. "He said we're ants." The door to the hospital room banged open. Julian Thorne walked in. He wasn't alone. He had 2 large bodyguards with him. He didn't look remorseful. He looked annoyed that his schedule had been interrupted. "Well," Julian said, looking around the room with distaste. "At least the baby is alive. Saves me a PR headache." Robert stood up slowly. He wasn't a tall man, perhaps 5'9", while Julian towered at 6'2". "Get out," Robert said. Julian laughed. He walked over to the bed, ignoring Robert entirely, and looked at Samuel. "Sign the papers, Samuel. If you tell the police I kicked you, I'll bury you in legal fees until you're living in a cardboard box. And I'll take the kid. You know I will. Who are they going to believe? The hysterical woman with no income, or the pillar of the community?" Julian turned his gaze to Robert. He looked the older man up and down, sneering at the flannel shirt. "And you," Julian scoffed, "the gardener. What are you going to do? Hit me with a shovel? Go back to Ohio, old man. This is the big city. The air is too expensive for you to breathe here." Robert didn't blink. He didn't shout. He didn't clench his fists. He just stared at Julian with eyes that were terrifyingly empty. "You hurt my daughter," Robert stated. It wasn't a question. "She fell," Julian lied smoothly. "But even if I did, what are you going to do about it? You have nothing. You are nothing." Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a $100 bill. He crumpled it up and tossed it at Robert's chest. It bounced off the flannel and landed on the floor. "For your bus fare home," Julian said. "Make sure she signs the NDA by morning, or I cut off the health insurance." Julian turned on his heel and marched out, his bodyguards trailing behind him like obedient dogs. Silence returned to the room. Samuel was weeping into her pillow. Robert stooped down. He picked up the $100 bill. He smoothed it out carefully, folding it neatly into a square. He placed it in his pocket. "Dad, I'm so sorry," Samuel whispered. "He's a monster." "Rest now, Elle," Robert said. He kissed her forehead. "I have to go make a phone call." "Who are you calling? We don't have a lawyer." "No," Robert said, walking to the door. "We don't need a lawyer. We need an exterminator." Robert walked out of the hospital room and down the long, sterile corridor. He took the elevator to the lobby and walked out into the cool New York night. He walked 3 blocks, away from the prying eyes of the hospital cameras, until he found a quiet alleyway. He reached into his boot and pulled out a phone. It wasn't the cracked Android he used to call Samuel. It was a satellite phone, heavy and encased in black rubber. He dialed a number that hadn't been active in 12 years. It rang once. "Authentication," a computerized voice requested. "Code black, Archangel 790, Robert said. His accent changed. The rural Ohio twang was gone, replaced by the crisp, sharp diction of a man who had been educated at Oxford and hardened in the trenches of international finance. There was a pause. Then a human voice answered, a voice that sounded stunned. "Mr. Vance? My God, we thought you were dead. The agency listed you as retired inactive since 2012. "I was," Robert said, staring up at the penthouse lights of the Manhattan skyline where Julian Thorne lived. "But I've just been reactivated." "What are your orders, sir? Do you need a tactical team?" "No guns," Robert said coldly. "Not yet. I want you to open the vault. Access the dead hand protocols." "Target?" "Julian Thorne, Thorne Enterprises. I want to know where every single cent of his money is. I want to know who he sleeps with, who he bribes, and where he hides his skeletons. I want full forensic dismantling of his life. Sir, Thorne is a major player. This will cause ripples in the market. I don't care about the ripples, Robert said, his eyes narrowing. I'm going to sink the whole ship. Initiate Protocol 0 by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Understood, sir. Welcome back. The architect. Robert hung up the phone. He looked at the crumpled $100 bill Julian had thrown at him. He took out a lighter and set the bill on fire, watching George Franklin's face burn until it was just ash in the wind. Julian Thorne thought he had kicked a helpless woman. He didn't realize he had just declared war on the former head of the International Financial Crimes Division, a man known in the underworld simply as the Architect, the man who built the cages for the world's biggest monsters, and the Architect was ready to work. Wednesday morning broke over New York City with a grey, relentless drizzle, matching the mood inside the small trailer park in Ohio, where Julian thought Robert Vance lived. But Robert wasn't in Ohio. Robert stood in front of a mirror in the penthouse suite of the St. Regis Hotel. He had checked in under the name Alexander Graves. The flannel shirt and dusty jeans lay in a pile in the corner, destined for the trash. In their place, Robert wore a charcoal three-piece suit, bespoke tailored on Savile Row a decade ago. It fit him perfectly. The manual labor of gardening had kept him lean and muscular, not frail. He ran a razor over his face, shearing away the grey stubble of the kindly grandfather. What remained was a sharp, angular jawline and a mouth set in a grim line. He looked 20 years younger and infinitely more dangerous. He walked into the living area of the suite. Waiting for him was a woman in her 40s with sharp glasses and a tablet, Arthur "Artie" Pendleton. She was the best forensic accountant the government had ever employed, and the only person Robert trusted completely. I pulled the file, Robert, Artie said, not looking up from her screen. It's worse than we thought. Julian Thorne isn't just a domestic abuser. He's running a Ponzi scheme disguised as a hedge fund. Robert poured himself a black coffee. Explain. Thorne Enterprises is leveraged to the hilt, Artie explained, projecting a complex web of financial charts onto the wall TV. He's been borrowing against his clients' assets to fund his lifestyle. The penthouses, the yachts, the diamonds for that mistress of his, Sophia Ritz. He's moving money through shell companies in Panama and the Cayman Islands to cover the holes in the balance sheet. If the market dips even 2%, he's insolvent. He's playing with fire, Robert murmured. He's playing with napalm, Artie corrected. But here's the kicker. He's about to close a merger with Omnicorp on Friday. If that deal goes through, he gets a massive cash injection. It will cover all his debts, hide the fraud, and make him untouchable. He walks away with $50 million in personal bonuses. Friday, Robert said, checking his watch. That gives us 48 hours. To do what? Call the SEC? Artie asked. No, Robert said, his eyes cold. The SEC takes months. Lawyers take years. I want him broken by dinner time on Friday. I want him to feel what it's like to be helpless. Robert walked to the window, looking out at the city. He froze Samuel's account. He kicked her when she was down. I'm going to freeze his entire life. How? Step 1. Isolation, Robert said. Julian thinks his power comes from his money, but it actually comes from his reputation. We take that away first. Is the honey trap protocol still active? Artie smirked. Always. Good. Julian has a weakness for validation. He needs to feel like the smartest, most desirable man in the room. Sophia Ritz feeds that ego. But she's also a mercenary. If the ship starts sinking, she won't grab a bucket. She'll grab the lifeboats. Robert turned back to Artie. Hack his phone, not just the call logs. I want the microphone. I want to hear him breathe. Then, I want you to buy the debt. Artie paused. Buy his debt? Robert, that's hundreds of millions. The agency budget won't cover that for a personal vendetta. I'm not using agency money, Robert said quietly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a black ledger. I'm using the ghost fund, the seized assets from the cartel bust in A8 that never made it to the official books. It's been sitting in a Swiss trust compounding interest for 15 years. Artie's eyes widened. That's nearly $1 billion liquid. Buy the debt, Robert commanded. Every loan, every mortgage, every credit line Julian Thorne has. By tomorrow morning, I want to be his only creditor. I want to own the roof over his head and the shirt on his back. And then, Robert smiled, a terrifying expression that didn't reach his eyes. I'm going to call in the loans. Meanwhile, across the city, Julian Thorne was in high spirits. He sat in his corner office on the 40th floor, looking at the skyline. Sophia was perched on the edge of his mahogany desk, scrolling through real estate listings on her phone. The villa in Tuscany is available, Julian, she purred. Only 12 million. We should get it as a congratulations gift for the Omnicorp merger. Buy it, Julian waved his hand dismissively. Once the deal signs on Friday, 12 million will be pocket change. His phone buzzed. It was his lawyer, Mr. Sterling. What is it, Sterling? Did my wife sign the NDA? Not exactly, Mr. Thorne. Sterling's voice sounded nervous. I went to the hospital this morning to pressure her. She's gone. Julian frowned. Gone? Discharged? No, moved. She was transferred to the VIP wing, the Platinum Suite, private security at the door. They wouldn't let me in. Julian laughed incredulously. The Platinum Suite costs $5,000 a night. She doesn't have $5. The hospital must have made a mistake. Or maybe her redneck father sold his trailer. There's something else, Julian. I tried to access your offshore account to transfer the retainer fee. It was blocked. Blocked? By who? Compliance. They said there's a suspicious activity report filed. It's probably just a glitch. But you might want to fix it, Julian snapped. I pay you to fix glitches, not tell me about them. He hung up the phone and looked at Sophia. Incompetent idiots. Is everything okay, baby? Sophia asked, tracing a finger down his tie. Fine. Just administrative nonsense. My wife is trying to play games. She probably found some pro bono charity lawyer to make noise. It doesn't matter. By Friday, I'll be the king of New York. Julian stood up and walked to the window. He looked down at the street, looking at the little dots of people moving below. He felt like a god. He didn't know that 3 miles away, his father-in-law was purchasing the mortgage on the very building Julian was standing in. Thursday, the day before the merger, the Gala for the Arts was the social event of the season, held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Every major player in New York finance was there. Julian Thorne arrived in a tuxedo, with Sophia on his arm wearing a red dress that left little to the imagination. They posed for the paparazzi. Julian flashed his winning smile. He felt invincible. He had checked his accounts earlier. The glitch was still there, but he had enough cash on hand to fake it for tonight. He grabbed a glass of champagne and began to work the room. He spotted Thomas Grand, the CEO of Omnicorp, the man he needed to impress to close the deal tomorrow. "Thomas!" Julian exclaimed, walking over. "Wonderful evening." Thomas Grand, a stern man with silver hair, turned. He didn't smile. He looked at Julian with a mixture of confusion and distance. "Julian," Thomas said stiffly, "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "Why not? I'm a patron," Julian laughed. "So, are we all set for the signing tomorrow at noon? I've got the champagne on ice." Thomas swirled his drink. "Actually, Julian, My board has raised some last-minute queries. We received an anonymous dossier this morning regarding your liquidity. Julian felt a drop of cold sweat roll down his back. Liquidity? That's absurd. My books are open. Are they? A voice came from behind them. Julian turned. Standing there was a man he didn't recognize. The man wore a midnight blue tuxedo that made Julian's look cheap. He held a crystal cane, though he didn't seem to need it. He had a perfectly groomed beard and eyes that pierced right through Julian. "Who are you?" Julian demanded. "This is a private conversation." "I'm the man who just bought the table you're standing at," the stranger said. His voice was rich, cultured, and oddly familiar, though Julian couldn't place it. "Alexander Graves, private equity." "I've never heard of you," Julian sneered. "You will," the man said. He turned to Thomas Grand. "Thomas, I've reviewed the financials of Thorn Enterprises. If you sign that merger tomorrow, you're buying a corpse." "Excuse me," Julian shouted, causing heads to turn. "You can't just walk in here and slander me. I'll sue you for defamation." The man stepped closer to Julian. He leaned in, invading his space, just as Julian had done to Samuel in the bank. "Do you remember the bank, Julian?" the man whispered. Julian froze. "What?" "The First National Bank, Tuesday morning, 10:14 a.m. You kicked a pregnant woman because she bumped your arm." Julian's face went white. How do you know that?" "I know everything, Julian. I know about the accounts in the Caymans. I know about the bribes paid to the zoning commissioner. And I know you're broke." Julian stared at the man. He looked at the eyes, the grey steel eyes. "Who are you?" Julian hissed. "I'm the gardener," the man said softly. Julian recoiled as if he'd been slapped. He stared at the sophisticated, powerful man in front of him. "No, that's impossible. You're a bum, a hillbilly." "Am I?" Robert Vance, now Alexander Graves, smiled. "I tried to be a gardener, Julian. I liked the peace. I liked growing things. But you decided to pull up the roots. So now, I'm back to my old job." "And what's that?" Julian stammered, his confidence crumbling. "Weeding," Robert said. Robert turned to the crowd. He raised his voice slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." The room quieted. Robert was a commanding presence. "My name is Alexander Graves. I represent the Solaris Group. As of 10 minutes ago, my firm has acquired the senior debt obligations of Thorn Enterprises." A murmur went through the crowd. This was a hostile takeover move. "Mr. Thorn," Robert said, looking down at Julian, "your loans are callable upon change of ownership. I am exercising that right. You owe my firm $340 million, payable immediately." "You can't do that," Julian screamed. "I have 30 days grace period. Read the fine print on page 402 of your loan agreement," Robert said calmly. "The moral turpitude clause. If the borrower is involved in a violent felony, the grace period is waived." "I haven't been charged with anything," Robert snapped his fingers. The giant screens in the main hall of the museum, usually displaying digital art, flickered. Suddenly, the security footage from the bank played on a 20-foot loop. The room gasped. There it was, in high definition. Julian Thorn, screaming at his pregnant wife, the kick, the fall, the callous walk away. "Oh my God," Sophia Ritz whispered, backing away from Julian. That's doctored," Julian yelled, looking around frantically. "It's a deep fake. This man is a fraud." Thomas Grand looked at the screen, then at Julian with absolute disgust. "The merger is off, Julian. Omnicorp doesn't do business with wife-beaters." "Thomas, wait," Julian pleaded, grabbing his arm. Thomas shook him off. "Don't touch me." Julian turned back to Robert. His face was red with rage. "You think this is over? You think a video scares me? I'll destroy you. I'll kill you." Julian lunged at Robert. It was a mistake. Robert didn't move his feet. He simply caught Julian's wrist with one hand, twisting it with a precise, agonizing pressure that forced Julian to his knees. "You're not fighting a pregnant woman now, boy," Robert whispered in Julian's ear. He shoved Julian away. Julian fell onto the polished floor, exactly how Samuel had fallen. "By tomorrow noon," Robert announced to the room, "Thorn Enterprises will be liquidated to pay its debts. Any assets remaining will be placed in a trust for Mr. Thorn's unborn son." Robert adjusted his cufflinks, looking down at the billionaire groveling on the floor. "Enjoy your evening, everyone." Robert walked out of the gala, the crystal cane tapping a rhythm of victory. He didn't look back. But the night wasn't over. Julian, humiliated and desperate, wasn't going to go down without a fight. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the stares of his former peers. He pulled out his phone. He wasn't calling a lawyer. He was calling a fixer, a man named Brutus, who handled problems that couldn't be solved legally. "I want him dead!" Julian screamed into the phone as he ran out the back exit. "The old man! I want him dead tonight!" Little did Julian know, Robert was counting on that call. It was 2 a.m. when Julian Thorn stood in the shadows of a derelict warehouse in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. The rain was coming down harder now, washing away the stench of the garbage, but not the stench of Julian's desperation. He was shivering, not from the cold, but from adrenaline. He had stripped off his tuxedo jacket, leaving him in a soaked dress shirt. He looked nothing like the master of the universe he claimed to be. A black SUV rolled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The window rolled down. A man with a scar running from his ear to his chin looked out. This was Brutus. "You have the cash?" Brutus asked, his voice like gravel. "I have watches," Julian stammered, holding out a bag. 3 Richard Milles, a diamond necklace. It's worth $2 million. Easy. I just need you to do the job tonight." Brutus looked at the bag, then unlocked the door. "Get in." Julian climbed into the back seat. He felt a surge of vicious triumph. The architect, Robert, thought he had won. He thought he could humiliate Julian with numbers and laws. But the street had its own laws, and Julian was about to enforce them. "Where is he?" Brutus asked as they sped toward Manhattan. "The St. Regis, penthouse suite," Julian said, checking his phone. Sophia had stopped answering his texts hours ago. She was probably already on a plane to Dubai. It didn't matter. Once Robert was dead, the debt deal would fall into probate. It would buy Julian time to flee the country. The car ride was silent. Julian played the scenario out in his head. He would walk in behind Brutus. He wanted to see the fear in the old man's eyes. He wanted to tell him, "You should have stayed in the garden." They arrived at the hotel. Surprisingly, the lobby was empty. No concierge, no security. "I cleared the floor," Brutus said, noticing Julian's confusion. "We have 10 minutes. They took the service elevator to the top floor. The golden doors opened. The hallway was silent. Brutus pulled out a silenced pistol. He moved with professional grace. Julian followed, his heart hammering against his ribs. They reached the double doors of the penthouse. Brutus kicked the door just below the lock. It flew open with a splintering crash. Julian rushed in, eager for the kill. "Surprise, you son of a—" Julian started to scream. He stopped. The lights in the penthouse were on. But Robert wasn't cowering in bed. He was sitting in a leather armchair facing the door. He was holding a glass of scotch. He wasn't alone. Sitting on the sofa were 3 men in suits. Julian recognized one of them. It was the police commissioner of New York. The other 2 were federal agents. And standing behind Robert, pouring a drink, was Artie. "You're late, Julian," Robert said, taking a sip of his drink. "We expected you at 2:15. It's 2:22. Julian froze. He turned to Brutus. "Shoot him! What are you waiting for? Shoot him!" Brutus lowered the gun. He walked past Julian, went over to the bar, and poured himself a water. "Sorry about the delay, architect," Brutus said to Robert. "He wouldn't shut up in the car. Kept trying to give me watches." Julian's brain short-circuited. You work for him." Robert stood up. He walked over to Julian. The air in the room was heavy with the weight of absolute power. "Julian," Robert said, his voice almost gentle. "Brutus was my extraction specialist in Beirut in 1998. Did you really think you could hire a mercenary in this city without me knowing? I built the network you tried to use." "This is entrapment," Julian screamed, backing away. "I didn't do anything. I was just—" "You solicited a murder for hire," the police commissioner said, standing up. "We have the audio recording from the car. We have the video of you handing over the payment. And we have the assault charge from the bank." Julian looked around the room. The walls were closing in. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. He wasn't a billionaire anymore. He wasn't a husband. He was a rat in a cage. He did the only thing a coward knows how to do. He ran. He bolted for the balcony. The glass doors were open. The wind whipped into the room. "Don't do it, Julian," Robert called out, not moving a muscle. Julian stopped at the railing, 40 floors down. The city lights blurred in the rain. He looked back at Robert. "You ruined me," Julian sobbed. "I was a king." "You were a bully," Robert corrected. "And kings who bully their people tend to lose their heads." Julian climbed onto the railing. He looked ready to jump. "Think about your son," Robert said. The words cut through the rain. "If you jump, he grows up knowing his father was a coward who took the easy way out. If you step down and face the music, maybe, just maybe, one day you can look him in the eye and say, 'You paid for your sins.'" Julian wavered. He looked down at the abyss. Then he looked at the handcuffs on the federal agent's belt. He collapsed onto the balcony floor, weeping. The agents moved in. As they dragged Julian away, he looked at Robert one last time. "Who are you?" Julian whispered, broken. Robert took a sip of his scotch. "I told you," Robert said. "I'm the grandfather." The trial of Julian Thorne was the fastest high-profile case in New York history. The evidence was overwhelming. The video of the kick, the financial records showing millions stolen from investors, the recording of him ordering the hit on his father-in-law. He pleaded guilty to all charges to avoid a life sentence. He was sentenced to 25 years in a federal penitentiary, with no possibility of parole for 15. But the real drama wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the hospital room where Samuel was recovering. 2 weeks had passed since the incident. Samuel was sitting up, reading a magazine. She looked healthier. The stress lines were fading. The door opened. Robert walked in. He was back in his flannel shirt and jeans. He held a potted plant, a small orchid. "Hey, kiddo," he said, placing the plant on the table. "Dad." Samuel smiled, but there was a question in her eyes. "I saw the news. They keep talking about this Alexander Graves who took down Julian. They say he's a ghost, a billionaire financier." She looked at her father, at his rough hands, at his worn boots. "Dad, was that you?" Robert sighed. He pulled up the plastic chair, the same one he had sat in when Julian threw the crumpled bill at him. "I have a past, Samuel," Robert said softly. "Before I met your mother, before we moved to Ohio, I worked for the government. I fixed broken financial systems. I hunted people who thought they were above the law. Why did you stop? Because it's a dark world, Elle. And when you stare into the dark too long, you forget what the light looks like. Then I met your mum, and we had you. You were the light. So I walked away. I buried the architect because I wanted to be a dad. I wanted to grow tomatoes and fix fences. Samuel reached out and took his hand. But you came back. I had to, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. I promised your mother on her deathbed that I would protect you. When Julian hurt you, I didn't have a choice. I had to become the monster one last time to kill the monster. So the money? Samuel asked. The billions? It's not mine, Robert said. It belongs to the trust. But I kept a commission, a consulting fee from the Thorn liquidation. He reached into his flannel pocket and pulled out a bank book. He handed it to her. Samuel opened it. Her eyes widened. $5 million, she gasped. It's enough to buy a house, Robert smiled. Enough to send the baby to college. Enough to make sure you never have to ask a man for a crib ever again. Dad. Tears streamed down her face. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, Robert said, patting her hand. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Don't let my grandson grow up to be a banker, Robert winked. Teach him to garden. It's better for the soul. The winter in upstate New York had been brutal, a relentless siege of ice and grey skies that seemed to mirror the turmoil inside Samuel's heart. But then, as if an unspoken treaty had been signed with the earth, the frost broke. The first week of May brought a warmth that soaked into the soil, turning the brown hills of the Hudson Valley into a vibrant, impossible green. The cottage sat at the end of a long gravel driveway, shielded from the main road by a dense line of ancient oak trees. It was a modest house with white clapboard siding and a wraparound porch that smelled of cedar and rain. It was the complete opposite of the glass and steel prison of the penthouse Samuel had shared with Julian. There were no marble floors here to slip on. There were no security cameras watching her every move. There was only the sound of wind chimes and the distant hum of bees waking up for the season. Samuel sat on the porch swing, a thick knitted blanket draped over her legs. In her arms lay Leo. He was 4 months old now, a bundle of alert curiosity, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that were startlingly clear. She looked down at him, tracing the curve of his cheek with her finger. For the first few weeks after the birth, she had been terrified to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back on the floor of the bank, feeling the impact of the kick, hearing the gasps of the strangers. She would wake up sweating, her hands clutching her belly, convinced she had lost him. But Leo was here. He was solid. He was warm. He's looking more like you every day, a voice rumbled from the garden. Samuel looked up. Robert was kneeling in a bed of freshly turned soil about 20 feet away. He wore his old uniform, the stained flannel shirt, the worn denim jeans, and the heavy work boots. To anyone passing by, he was just an old man tending to his petunias. But Samuel knew better now. She watched the way his hands moved, precise, deliberate, powerful. Those were the same hands that had dismantled a billion-dollar hedge fund in 48 hours. Those were the hands that had brought the King of New York to his knees without throwing a single punch. I think he has your stubbornness, Dad, Samuel replied, a small smile touching her lips. He refuses to nap unless I walk him around the perimeter of the property 3 times. Robert chuckled, standing up and wiping the dirt from his knees. He walked up the porch steps, the wood creaking softly under his weight. He sat in the rocking chair opposite her, picking up a glass of iced tea. Perimeter checks are important, Robert said, his eyes twinkling. The boy has good instincts. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. It was a peace that had been hard won. Did the mail come? Samuel asked, her voice tightening slightly. Robert paused, the glass halfway to his mouth. The air shifted. The relaxed grandfather vanished for a split second, replaced by the watchful protector. It did, Robert said. I put it on the kitchen counter. There's a letter from the prison, Elle. It's from him. Samuel felt a cold shiver run down her spine, despite the warm sun. Julian, even from behind bars, stripped of his fortune and his reputation, he still tried to cast a shadow. What does he want? She whispered. Does it matter? Robert asked gently. He's likely asking for a visitation, or maybe he's trying to manipulate you into supporting his appeal. Narcissists don't change, Samuel. They just change tactics. Samuel looked down at Leo. The baby grasped her finger, his grip surprisingly strong. I don't want to read it, she said. Then don't, Robert said. I can burn it, or we can frame it as a reminder of what we survived. It's your choice. You have all the power now. The ghost from the past. Later that afternoon, a black sedan crunched up the gravel driveway. It wasn't a menacing vehicle, but it had an air of official business. Samuel was in the kitchen, feeding Leo, when she heard the car door close. She tensed, but Robert was already at the front door. He didn't look alarmed. He opened the door to reveal a woman with sharp features, wearing a tailored pantsuit that looked out of place in the countryside. It was Artie, the woman Samuel had met only once in the chaos of the trial, the woman who, according to the news, didn't officially exist. Arthur, Robert greeted her with a nod. You found the place. You didn't exactly make it easy, Robert, Artie said, stepping inside and removing her sunglasses. She looked around the rustic living room with a critical eye, then softened when she saw Samuel. Mrs. Thorne. Or, is it back to Miss Vance? Just Samuel is fine, Samuel said, wiping formula from her shirt. Please come in. Artie sat at the kitchen table. She opened a slim leather briefcase and slid a single file folder across the wood. The liquidation is complete, Artie said, her voice crisp and professional. Thorne Enterprises is no more. The building has been sold to a tech conglomerate. The yacht was auctioned to pay off the unsecured creditors. And the assets, she glanced at Robert, have been successfully diverted into the blind trust for Leo. How much? Samuel asked, feeling a strange detachment from the numbers. After taxes, legal fees, and the repayment of the debts Robert bought. The trust currently holds $42 million, Artie stated. It's locked. You can access the interest for living expenses, but the principal is untouchable until Leo turns 25. That ensures no one, not even a future partner, can drain it. Samuel stared at the folder. $42 million. It was an abstract number. It was the price of her humiliation converted into security. And Julian? Robert asked, pouring Artie a cup of black coffee. He's not doing well, Artie said, a hint of dark satisfaction in her voice. General population wasn't kind to him. He tried to pay for protection, but he has no money left to access. He's currently in protective custody, working in the laundry unit, earning 12 cents an hour. He spends most of his time writing letters to his former friends on Wall Street. None of them have written back. Good, Robert said, taking a sip of his tea. Let him rot. Artie looked at Robert. The agency is asking, Robert. They want to know if the architect is officially retired. There's a situation in Zurich that requires a delicate touch. They're willing to double your old fee. The room went silent. Samuel looked at her father. She saw the flash in his eyes, the old spark of the game, the thrill of the hunt. He was a man who had lived in the shadows for decades. Could he really be happy growing tomatoes? Robert looked at Artie. Then he looked at Samuel, and finally, his gaze rested on the baby sleeping in the bassinet by the window. He slowly shook his head. "Tell them I'm dead," Robert said softly. "Tell them the architect died the night he walked out of the St. Regis. There's only a gardener here now." Artie held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. She respected the code. She closed her briefcase and stood up. "It was an honor, sir," she said. She turned to Samuel. "You have a very dangerous guardian angel, Samuel. Don't let him get bored." With that, she walked out. The car started, turned around, and disappeared down the lane, taking the last remnants of the cold, corporate world with it. The fire that evening, the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of violet and burnt orange. The air grew cool. Robert started a fire in the stone hearth in the living room. Samuel sat on the rug, watching the flames dance. On the mantelpiece sat the unopened letter from the prison. The white envelope looked stark against the dark wood. "Dad?" Samuel asked. "Yeah, kiddo." "Why did you leave the first time, when I was little? You were gone for 3 years. Mum said you were working on an oil rig." Robert poked the fire with an iron rod. Sparks flew up the chimney. "I was in Eastern Europe, dismantling a trafficking ring. I told myself it was for the greater good, that I was making the world safer for you." He turned to look at her, his face illuminated by the firelight. The shadows deepened the lines on his face. "But then I came home," he continued. "And you had learned to ride a bike without me. You had lost your first tooth without me. I realized that saving the world didn't mean anything if I lost my own world in the process. I missed the important things, Elle. I promised myself I wouldn't miss them again." He gestured toward the letter on the mantel. "That man, Julian. He made the same mistake I almost made. He chose power over people. He chose the image over the reality. And now he has nothing." Samuel stood up. She walked to the mantel. Her hands were steady. She picked up the letter. She looked at the handwriting, Julian's sharp, jagged script. She remembered how those hands had felt, pushing her. She remembered the cruelty in his voice. She realized she didn't care what he had to say. She didn't need his apology to heal. She didn't need his explanation to understand. He was simply a chapter in her book that had ended. She tossed the unopened envelope into the fire. For a moment, it sat on the logs, white and pristine. Then, the paper curled. The edges turned black. A blue flame licked the corner, and suddenly the words of Julian Thorne were consumed by heat and light. They turned to ash, rising up the chimney to be scattered into the night. "Dinner's ready," Robert said, not acknowledging the moment, but understanding it perfectly. "I made stew." The visitor. 2 days later, on a Saturday, another car arrived. This one was a modest sedan, a Honda that had seen better days. Samuel was in the garden, helping Robert tie up the tomato plants, when she saw the driver step out. It was a young woman with curly brown hair, holding a large casserole dish covered in foil. It was Sarah, the bank teller. Samuel froze for a second. Seeing Sarah was like seeing a ghost from the worst day of her life. It brought back the smell of the bank lobby, the humiliation. But Sarah wasn't looking at her with pity. She was smiling nervously. I hope it's okay that I came," Sarah called out from the driveway. "I got the address from the lawyer's office. I had to sign 100 confidentiality forms just to get it." Samuel wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. "Sarah, hi." "I brought lasagna," Sarah said, lifting the dish. "I figured, well, new moms don't have time to cook." Samuel looked at the woman who had vaulted over the counter to help her when no one else would. The woman who had screamed for the ambulance. "Thank you," Samuel said, and without thinking, she pulled Sarah into a hug. Sarah stiffened in surprise, then hugged her back tightly. "I'm so glad you're okay," Sarah whispered. "I've been thinking about you every day. When I saw him kick you, I thought—" "I know," Samuel said, pulling back. "But we made it. Come and meet him." She led Sarah to the porch where Leo was sleeping in his carrier. Sarah looked down at the baby, her eyes filling with tears. "He's beautiful," Sarah said. "He looks peaceful." "He is," Samuel said. "We all are." Sarah looked up at the garden, at Robert, who was pretending to be busy with a hose so the women could talk. "You know," Sarah said quietly, "the bank changed the policies because of what happened to you. No more spousal authorization overrides without dual consent, and they fired the manager who tried to cover it up. You changed things, Samuel." "I didn't do much," Samuel said. "I just fell down." "No," Sarah shook her head. "You got back up. That's the part that matters." The roots. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in a bruised purple, Sarah said her goodbyes. The house was quiet again. Robert finished his work in the garden and walked up to the porch. He sat on the steps, groaning slightly as his knees popped. "Getting old, architect?" Samuel teased, sitting beside him. "Rust never sleeps," Robert smiled. "But the garden is looking good. The soil here, it's rich. It remembers." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small packet of seeds. He handed them to Samuel. "What are these?" she asked. "Oak trees," Robert said. "From the big tree out back. I collected the acorns last fall and dried them." Samuel looked at the small, hard seeds in her palm. "Why are you giving them to me?" "Because I won't be around forever, Elle," Robert said, his voice matter-of-fact, devoid of sadness. "And a garden needs a keeper. I want you to plant these with Leo when he's old enough to hold a shovel. Teach him that things of value take time to grow. Money, stocks, reputation, that's all fast. It burns up like paper in a fire. But an oak tree that stands through the storms." Samuel leaned her head on her father's shoulder. She smelled the dirt, the sweat, and the faint scent of old spice. It was the smell of safety. "I'll teach him," she promised. "Good," Robert said. He stood up and stretched. "Now, I believe it's bath time for the little tycoon, and if I hear one peep about stocks or bonds, I'm grounding him until he's 30. Samuel laughed, a genuine full sound that echoed across the valley. She picked up Leo, holding him close to her chest. She looked out over the darkened hills. Somewhere, far away in a concrete cell, Julian Thorne was sitting in the dark, wondering where his life had gone wrong. But here, in the quiet cottage at the end of the lane, life was just beginning. Samuel walked inside and closed the door, shutting out the night, leaving only the warmth of the fire and the family that had walked through hell to find each other again. They weren't billionaires. They weren't royalty. They were something much stronger. They were free. The story of Julian Thorne serves as a brutal reminder. True power isn't about the money in your bank account or the suit on your back. Julian thought he was untouchable because of his wealth, but he forgot that character is the only currency that matters in the end. He kicked his wife when she was down, believing she was weak, but he failed to realize that the strongest trees often have the deepest, most hidden roots. Robert Vance proved that a father's love is a force more destructive than any financial weapon. In a world obsessed with status, be careful who you step on, because the person you dismiss today might be the one holding your fate tomorrow. Karma doesn't always come instantly, but as Julian found out, when it arrives, it collects with interest. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button to support the channel. Do you think Julian deserved 25 years, or should the punishment have been harsher? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories about karma and justice, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.